Hello. I figured this is the perfect novel for me to discuss on my private channel because it is a it is an author and a work that is awash with people who know way more than I do. So I will give my honest reaction and a few thoughts. But if for some reason you stumble upon this video of me talking about Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, her second novel, published in 1813, I really suggest you go along and find people that seem to be really immersed in the Austen world and Austen books. I couldn't actually say honestly how many of the Jane Austen books I've read. I think I've read Pride and Prejudice. Well, I know I've read Pride and Prejudice because that's what I just did, and I've read probably a couple of other ones. But it's one of these authors that I picked up and I read and I really enjoy, and then I put down, and that's about it. And I don't really go in for um, I'm recording this in July, and on BookTube there's this whole thing of uh, Jane Austen July, where people are reading like the works of Jane Austen. They're talking about the nonfiction works about Jane Austen. They're talking about all the adaptations of Jane Austen, and I am not even a dilettante. I'm just kind of a looky-loo in this situation. But inspired by that, that's why I bring it up. Inspired by that, I picked up Pride and Prejudice see if I can even get the title right, and read it. And I really enjoyed myself, and I just figured I'd drop a couple of kind of concluding thoughts on the novel. Um, Also, a couple of reflections actually on an adaptation which I'm in the middle of doing, which is a web series called the Lizzie Bennet Diaries, which is a YouTube webisode series, like 5 minutes long, where Pride and Prejudice is reimagined as Lizzie Bennet's web vlog. Um, YouTube vlog where she's just sort of recording her life, and suddenly she gets interested in her older sister Jane's love life, and oh, there's this guy, Mr. Darcy, that she hates so much. But I'll get to that. I'll get to that at the end. So yes, Pride and Prejudice. Um, I it's probably one of these books that I don't even need to summarize. I think some of the salient points for me are it's the Bennett family, where Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, they have property, but it's entailed, which means they need a male heir to actually be able to pass it along, because by the rules of inheritance, you can only pass it along to a male heir. So they try for a male, and they end up with 5 daughters instead. And instead, now they've sort of given up on the whole that 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 train has left the station. That now they've kind of resigned themselves to the fact that a male relative, Mr. Collins, a is he a priest or I'm not quite sure. I always get mixed up with my English stuff there, but a right reverend or something of like a very pompous fellow is going to actually inherit the property when Mr. Bennet dies. So what this book is concerned with, for the most part, is the how these five daughters, and more specifically, two of the daughters with another third thrown in for good luck, are going to find marriages. If you're a woman in this society of a certain class, um, I guess kind of middle class, I guess you would call it. I'm not quite sure the delineation here, but if you are, you either find a husband or you are going to be consigned to kind of falling into servitude as like as a not a nanny. What is it? Like a tutor. Oh God. Oftentimes these women get, even in Jane Austen books, they will become they become the governess, yes, that's it, to the thing. So there's a real urgency here for these women. This is very much cast as a kind of romantic comedy of manners, but Austen is really careful to kind of delineate underneath all this kind of some really hard social and economic truths about the lives of these women, even using what I think is, even at the time, she's making fun of a certain genre of kind of what I think you would think of nowadays as kind of romantic comedy. Um, but under the lines of I better find someone to marry because if I don't, my life is going to be complete shit. It's and going to be dependent on others, and this is basically the way for that they can kind of find agency. So into this, you so we this primarily focuses on Elizabeth Bennet, the second oldest daughter, who's a very kind of sharp-witted, sharp-tongued, very quick to judgment, prejudicial, you might say, in her impressions, and Jane, the very beautiful, the more beautiful of the two eldest, the eldest daughter, more beautiful, extremely good-natured, extremely kind-hearted, someone who's actually going to, in her first impressions, she'd always give someone the benefit of the doubt. They kind of contrast each other that way. And into their lives come Bingley. No, no, see, Bingley is the Lizzie Bennett Diaries version of it. Bingley, a wealthy bachelor who comes to the neighborhood, and it's like, oh, it's a free bachelor, and you can see all the women around scrambling, and it's played off as comedic, but it's also, holy shit, this is a major prospect. There's that urgency there. Um, I have to warn you that I do have a tendency to view a lot of these books as horrible dystopian novels. Like if this was set slightly in the future and made a little bit, the humor was dropped out, you would get the grimness of things. The grimness, as I have my little doodle cuddle up beside me. Um, so, but yeah, Bingley comes. They're having this romance. There's that. There is, but there's also this other fellow, Mr. Darcy, his friend, William Darcy, who Elizabeth Bennet immediately really detests, finds him aloof, uh, finds him basically condescending. He just thinks he's just the worst guy. He keeps on talking to me, and I like. He's like he hardly danced with anyone at the first thing, but of course he dances with her. There's all these little hints that Jane Austen kind of puts into the thing of, well, Elizabeth hates him, but he seems to really have a lot of fascination with her. And so it's really delightfully done, and she spars, and she really is kind of a real shit. She is someone who really kind of uh, uh, I appreciate as kind of coming from a lot of like kind of the Victorian novelists of like Trollope or Dickens, where women are either they're complete paragons, or they are or they're kind of plucky, forthright. It's like I like that Elizabeth Bennet is sort of like, she's a good person, but you also get the sense of like, well, she feels like textured as a little bit more textured of a female character. Like this is something that's like, oh, this is actually told from within a woman's point of view. Um, we also have in here, yeah, I was talking about Mr. Collins, a very kind of pompous guy who tries to tries to uh, tries to propose, and like like, oh, he's looking at the daughters and think, well, Jane's already taken, and I'll propose to Elizabeth, and that will be a good union for our thing, and you'll be very grateful to me. And Elizabeth is like, no, I'm never going to marry you. You're an idiot. and, and really shuts him down. And he's like, "Oh," and then he immediately goes to her friend Charlotte, who is an older. She's like really old for being still on the market. She's 27. Jesus, ancient. And Charlotte sort of looks at the situation and is actually says, you know what? I'm very grateful that someone who's actually kind of a decent prospect. He's not like stellar or anything, but he's like, it's something that would like, I'm not going to love him, but it's a very practical thing of, I'm in a tough situation of like, if I don't get married, what is my life prospects can be. And she's kind of properly, I guess in a way, she's like, okay, yeah, I will take that, and I'm going to be grateful about it. I'm not going to be bitter, and I'm gonna make do with the situation. I'm probably gonna try and mold Mr. Collins as best I can. Ignore his faults. He is probably, well, we'll get to exactly how good-hearted of a person he is, um, but she accepts him, and it's like that's kind of one of those striking examples of outside of the romance and the kind of the wish fulfillment of of um, both Jane Bennett and Elizabeth Bennett. You have a lot more around the periphery. You have what I'd say are much more the kind of like, oh, these are maybe more the ugly truths that we're kind of playing off as comedy, and that's one of them is Charlotte. Like looking at her, going, this isn't someone I would actually have a romantic relationship with. This isn't someone I would, if I had my own kind of economic and social control of my life, that I would pick. But because of what the situation is, I'm going to pick it. And I'm a strong enough kind of a person that I'm going to make the best of it. And she does. And you got to really kind of, it's like one of those striking characters that, like Jane Austen. Um, it's not just all about these main characters. It's like these minor characters that you go, oh, you kind of get some, you feel like they're real people in there, which I guess, hey, that's why that Jane Austen seems to keep on ticking along through the ages there. Um, so yes, and then we get, this is Pride and Prejudice. This is Elizabeth having very much, um, taking a first impression and saying like, oh, I hate you, and then taking that prejudice and allowing some scuzzball guy like Wickham, who comes into this book, a kind of an army dude who sweeps into town, and he's got tales of how Darcy did him wrong and robbed him of his rightful inheritance, and Elizabeth, because of her prejudice, just sort of takes that at face value, lets it feed in, and also maybe just sort of takes, just like that Wickham is such a good looking and on the surface very surface charming fellow, all that sort of stuff, kind of, even with her intelligence and sharpness, she's snowed in by that. She allows that to snow her in, confirm her prejudice, and also just sort of like, maybe not take underlying character as a proper guide, which I think a lot of us do. You're like, oh, he seems like a nice fellow, and you sort of let it go along versus going, oh, how do they act? How are they really? And seeing that by the end of the novel, spoiler, realizing that Darcy is actually an extremely moral, extremely good, good, good man. Um, maybe to a fault. I don't know. Um, there's some ways that a Darcy reads to me maybe is a little too good to be true. That's on, at least on this reading of the thing, is a little too good to be true. Um, it's very, there's a very kind of romance reading that I'm at least getting on this thing. Now, what happens throughout this, the things that interest me in the book are the fate of a character like Lydia, who is a younger sister who is a flirt, which, it's interesting. I'm watching Lizzie Bennett Diaries, and it's sort of cast as party girl, sort of thing, which I think is actually kind of a pretty fair, fair, fair. Uh, Kind of analogy to what that would be look like in Regency Britain, um, and what her fate is as a young girl who does get completely swept up by Wickham, and gets into a disastrous union, like is almost to the point of she's going to be ruined, and ruin her family with her reputation, which is only just saved by Wickham because of uh, interventions by Darcy, to that he actually marries her, and saves her reputation at least. But you get the sense of, it's a 16-year-old girl who is foolish and is now doomed to a really terrible life with somebody who's not worth anything. And it's like that this happened to a young girl who, yeah, she's a little wild in her youth, but that's going to impact her for the rest of her life. And it's not a happy ending for Lydia. And I mean, we're kind of shown Lydia as being as vapid, as being kind of an analogy to Mrs. Bennet, who in this book is very much a doughhead, someone who is obsessed with getting her daughters married, but hasn't really got much in the way of a moral center, hasn't got much in the way of sense, and is like, viciously, just horribly hates Wickham when he snatches away Lydia, this freaking underage girl. Um, but then the second he marries her, she's like, "Oh, he's just wonderful. He's wonderful." Because yeah, I don't care who I offload these girls to. It's just like, great, she's married, she's one down, and I got four more to go, and um, it's kind of a scary character that way. Um, and you have the father, who is this kind of very amiable, but also kind of negligent father, who 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 sort of lets his wife kind of run these things disastrously, and it's one of these things of it's a society where the patriarchy has so taken control that it's fallen asleep at the wheel, in a way. Might be a thing of like, I love my father, but he's also um, not. He's just he's also just sort of a negligent force, and it's like the daughters themselves that have to make their way. And yes, Jane and Elizabeth do make their way and are able to kind of steer themselves, but they're not certainly not getting that guidance from um, their mother and father, which is an interesting commentary in this book. Um, and I was thinking about the character of Mr. Collins in this book, because he's used as very much a comedic foil. He is very pompous, but it's interesting how where he touches down in this novel. And I've already mentioned his marriage to Charlotte, and how that sort of in some ways represents, an older uh, young woman, 27, who's got to kind of settle, and is gotta just make do. And this kind of ridiculous figure is what she can do with. But there's also a thing later on in the book where he writes a couple of letters. The first letter is just horrendous, because he's heard of Lydia absconding with Wickham, and he writes this letter, which is just like, how shocking and terrible this is, and how poorly this reflects on the Bennett family, on how, they must be terrible, they're terrible parents for allowing this to happen. And that and that boy, he's really lucky that he didn't marry into the family, because this would reflect poorly on him, and that would be really terrible. um and it's just this kind of like, uh it's done very comedically, and you're thinking, "Oh, what an asshole!" But you also think it's like, "Oh, this is actually kind of a brainless version of the society, of how the society would just completely turn on a woman and viciously just rip them apart." Um, in a kind of very good humored, I'm morally superior kind of way. It's like it's really savagely um, pointed in how it just takes a character like him. Oh, and I think but yeah. So those are my thoughts on Jane Austen. I'm gonna go see how things are going. I'll leave the Lizzie Bennet diaries for later. But yeah, those are my basic thoughts. That's a lot for someone who's a know nothing on Jane Austen. All right. See you. Talk to you later.